Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you a story that will challenge everything you've ever thought about life and death. Let's meet Ansel Merrick, a man who literally faced death one winter night and came back with a breathtaking revelation. He discovered that hell doesn't exist. Yes, you heard that right. What he found on the other side will change his outlook on life forever. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any impactful content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this intense and surprising journey. My name is Ansel Merrick, and, as contradictory as it may seem, the scariest event of my life was also the most transformative and enlightening. Maybe it sounds strange to say it like that, but that's exactly what happened. One winter night, a series of events led me to a near-death experience that forever changed how I thought about life, death, and what lies beyond. I was born and raised in a small town in the mountains of Colorado, where winter wasn't just a season, it was almost an entity. The cold surrounded us like an icy blanket, and the silence of the snow, covering everything, created a scenario that, for many, would be desolate, but for me, it was always welcoming. My early years were spent amid landscapes of ice-covered forests and rivers that froze to the bottom. The mountains, with their grandeur, served as a backdrop for all my childhood memories. Over the years, my view of the world has become pragmatic and even a little cynical. I always believed that everything needed to have a logical explanation, a concrete reason. For me, death was simply the end. No paradise, hell, reincarnation, just a complete blackout. Perhaps this conviction gave me a false sense of control, that by approaching life rationally I could avoid any kind of illusion or weakness. However, the experience I'm about to share took me completely out of that comfort zone. When it all happened, I was in my early 20s and had no idea what the universe was in store for me that night. I was leaving a bar with Marcus, my childhood friend, without knowing that the next few hours would change my life forever. I fell into a frozen river and, between panic and darkness, I was transported to a reality that defies any rational explanation. Today, in telling this story, my goal is not to convince anyone of anything, but simply to share what I experienced. What I experienced that night brought me an inexplicable peace and freed me from many of the fears and uncertainties that previously consumed me. I don't know how or why it happened, but I feel like I was given a glimpse of something bigger, something that gave me a new perspective on why we were here. This account is more than a story about an accident. It is a journey into the unknown, an experience that, even years later, still moves me deeply. If you've ever wondered what happens after it's all over, perhaps my words can offer a little comfort, or at least food for thought. So, get ready. I'm about to share the moment my life split into before and after, a near-death experience that showed me a vision of what lies beyond what we can see and touch. That winter night seemed like any other, but there was something in the air, a different, almost dense silence that accompanied the slow and steady fall of snowflakes. The mountains around the little town were covered in ice, and the cold, intense even by Colorado standards, seemed to penetrate right to the bone. The streets were deserted except for a few lights on in the houses along the way, reminding us that, even in the darkness and cold, there was life there. My childhood friend Marcus and I were walking home after a night at the local bar. Our laughter broke the silence of the night as clouds of steam escaped our mouths with each word spoken. There was a familiarity between us that made everything natural, almost as if, by his side, I could forget any worries and simply enjoy the moment. Don't you think it was a bad idea to walk here? We should have taken the car, I grumbled, trying to warm my hands in my coat pockets. Oh, come on, Ansel, Marcus laughed, that carefree laugh that always accompanied him. When else are we going to have the chance to walk through a night like this? Look around. This is like a painting. I knew he was right, in a way. Marcus has always had a knack for finding beauty in everything, especially simple things. The contrast with my view of the world was evident. While he saw the charm of winter and the magic of falling snow, I only saw the cold and discomfort of a long, icy walk. But that night, I decided to let myself go. As we continued walking, a deeper silence began to grow between us, as if the environment itself had something to say. At some point, Marcus broke this silence with an unexpected question. Have you ever thought about what happens when we die? The question took me by surprise, and for a moment I didn't know what to answer. That seemed strange coming from him. The guy who always found life and small things funny. After a few seconds, I let out a nervous laugh. Honestly, I don't believe there's anything after all this. When we die, it's just the end. He looked at me with a serious, almost disappointed expression. I think there's more, Ansel. More than we can see. And I think, one day, you'll understand what I mean. The conversation left me thoughtful, but I had no intention of changing my perspective. For me, the world was what it was, a succession of events and situations without a greater purpose. It wasn't that I considered myself a bitter person, but I preferred to keep my feet on the ground and not get carried away by ideas that couldn't be proven. Looking back, it's almost scary to think about how that conversation ended up being a premonition of what was to come. At that moment, we were just two friends walking in the snow, unaware of the danger that lay ahead of us. But that would be the beginning of the night that would change everything. After the unexpected conversation about what existed beyond life, I felt an unease in the air. Maybe it was just the intensifying cold, but the silence around us felt even deeper and more absolute. Marcus, as always, tried to diffuse any tension with his good humor, but I was distracted, lost in thoughts about what he had said, and it was at that moment that we made the mistake of passing through a section that, until then, seemed like just another expanse of snow. As we walked, I began to notice that something was different beneath my feet. The ground seemed to give way slightly, as if I were standing on an unstable surface. I stopped for a moment, trying to understand what was happening, and then I heard a sound that made my heart race, a clear, sharp crack. Marcus also stopped and looked at me with an alert expression. "Did you hear that?" I asked, feeling a chill that didn't just come from the cold. Before he could respond, the sound repeated itself, but now more intensely. Suddenly I realized that we were not in a snowfield as we thought, but on a sheet of ice covering a frozen river. The ice below us felt fragile, like a thin web about to break, and panic began to overcome me. "Ansel, don't move too fast," Marcus said, his voice strained, as he tried to distribute his weight carefully. "Let's try to get back to the field." Slowly. I knew he was right, but fear began to paralyze me. Each step felt like a risk, and the sound of cracking ice seemed to grow louder, echoing through the void around us. I tried to move calmly, but then, before I could take another step, the ground beneath me gave way. I felt the cold surface crumble beneath my feet, and in an instant, I was swallowed by the icy waters. The feeling was brutal. The freezing water cut my skin like knives, and the darkness was total. I tried to swim, but the current was strong and dragged me quickly, as if it had a life of its own. The shock of the cold was so intense that I could barely think. The world seemed to turn upside down as the current carried me further and further from the point where I fell. "Ansel! Ansel!" I heard Marcus scream, but his voice already sounded distant, muffled by the weight of the water and ice above me. I struggled, desperately trying to break through the ice to get to the surface, but I couldn't find a firm footing. Everything I touched was thick ice, like an impenetrable wall. The darkness around me was oppressive, almost suffocating, and for a moment I felt pure despair. With each failed attempt to find a way out, my strength diminished, and the freezing water made my movement slower and slower. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. Everything seemed to be against me, as if the river itself was determined to keep me there, a prisoner under the ice. As time passed, the cold began to consume what little energy I had left, and my lungs begged for air. In a last desperate effort, I hit the ice hard, but my vision began to go black. Little by little, my mind gave way, and the fear began to be replaced by a strange feeling of calm, as if, somehow, I knew the fight was ending. And then, the moment my consciousness began to fade, everything changed. As my consciousness wavered, a fraction of me still tried to cling to life. The extreme cold made every movement an almost impossible effort, as if I were trying to swim through concrete. I felt the river current pulling me away, my body floating, helpless out in the icy waters. Somewhere above me, beneath a thick layer of ice, was air and light that I couldn't reach. I tried to break the ice, push myself up, but my strength was fading quickly. Each movement seemed to consume what little I had left, and exhaustion enveloped me, an exhaustion so complete that even the pain of the cold began to dissipate. The fear that once dominated my heart was transformed into a kind of resignation. I was tired, so tired that stopping fighting seemed like the only option. It was then that a thought crossed my mind. This is the end. The words echoed in my head with frightening clarity, and the moment I thought about it, I found myself confronted with everything I had ever believed, that death was just emptiness. But instead of terrifying me, this idea began to seem almost natural. A strange relief came amid the despair, as if nature itself was preparing me for what came next. With the last bit of strength, I tried one last time to reach the surface, but my hands shook and refused to respond. A feeling of numbness took over my body, starting with my fingers, slowly moving up my arms, until the cold no longer mattered to me. My body, which moments before seemed to be the prison of all my fears and anxieties, now became something distant. All that was left was a strange calm, an acceptance I had never felt before. And then, complete darkness came. My vision, already blurred and fragmented, dissolved like a light switch. It was like my mind was shutting down, one layer at a time, until there was nothing left but silence. But surprisingly, this silence wasn't scary. It was deep and comforting, an emptiness that enveloped me with a softness that surprised me. In the midst of this darkness, something unexpected happened. I began to feel a presence, something inexplicable but undeniably real. There was no shape or face, but a feeling of warmth and security, as if I were being welcomed by something bigger than myself, something that had always been there, waiting for me. The fear completely dissipated, and for the first time I felt a peace that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. And suddenly, the images started to emerge. They were not visions in the traditional sense, but fragments of feelings, ideas, and memories that passed through me, making me feel connected to everything around me. It was as if I were part of a greater whole, a consciousness that permeated everything. The reality I knew dissolved, and what remained was the pure sensation of existing, without body, without limits. As my body floated in the icy water, my mind felt free, expanding beyond everything I knew. I felt the presence of everything and everyone, as if each being, each life, and each memory were intertwined in a great web of existence. The realization that I was part of something so vast and incomprehensible brought me an intense joy, a peace that I never thought possible. This unity, this interconnectedness of all things, was so powerful and true that there was no room for fear or pain. I was one with the universe, and the universe was one with me. And, in that state of complete peace, a new certainty formed in my mind. Hell, as a place of eternal suffering, did not exist. I could feel that there was no condemnation, just a universal acceptance, an embrace that embraced all souls without exception. It was in this state of ecstasy and understanding that a soft voice, almost a whisper, reverberated in my mind. Not yet. She was firm, but at the same time full of tenderness, as if someone was calling me back, telling me that my journey wasn't over yet. And with that, I felt my body again. The pain and cold returned, but something inside me had changed forever. The transition back into my body was abrupt and painful, like I was being ripped from an indescribable peace and forced back into something that no longer made sense. However, before I opened my eyes, I still felt the softness of that voice. Not yet. It was like a whisper etched into my mind, carrying an incomparable tenderness and a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before. My first instinct was to try to hold on to that feeling of peace and unity, but it started to fade, like a dream that shatters the moment we wake up. Little by little, I felt the intense cold again, the shock of the icy water on my lungs, the weight of my body trying to pull me down. Then everything happened in a succession of flashbacks and confusion. I threw up river water, coughing as the frigid air cut into my throat. My hands clawed at the ice surface around me, trying to find a way out. Ansel, listen to me, man, you're with me. Marcus's voice sounded distorted and desperate. I still couldn't understand where I was, but his firm hands pulled me, pulling me out of the water with all the strength he possessed. Feeling the weight of my own body, I fell to my knees in the snow, the shock of the cold hitting me brutally. I think I'm fine. The words came out amid coughs and desperate attempts to breathe. Marcus knelt beside me, holding my shoulders and looking at me with an expression of relief and panic at the same time. For God's sake, Ansel, I thought you were… I don't know, man, I thought you weren't coming back. I looked at him, but the feeling of disconnection was still intense. The physical world felt fragile, like it was just a shell of what I had just experienced. Every snowflake that fell around us, Every sound muffled by the layer of ice felt at once familiar and strange, as if I were seeing everything for the first time, with a new depth. My mind was still immersed in that sense of unity that I had experienced, that state where everything and everyone was interconnected. I was somewhere else, I murmured, my voice barely audible. I don't know how to explain it, Marcus, but I felt something I never imagined. He looked at me with a mix of skepticism and concern. Ansel, you are probably in shock. That was a nightmare, man. You almost died. The word died seemed to echo in my mind in a different way than before. Before that experience, dying was something I feared, something that meant the end, complete darkness. Now death seemed like something much deeper, a transition, almost a bridge to something beyond our understanding. I felt an immense desire to explain to Marcus what I had experienced, but words seemed useless to describe the vastness of that feeling. Whatever it was, he said, still holding me. You're here now, with me. Let's get out of this damn ice before you actually freeze. I let him help me up, my body still shaking, but my mind wandered between the present and the memory of that intense experience. The way back seemed endless, but with each step, I felt different, as if the weight of my old worldview was gradually being replaced by a new understanding. As we moved further away from the river, I began to wonder, would anyone understand what I experienced? That state of peace, that sense of unity, it seemed unlikely that anyone could capture the depth of it. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. When I finally got home, I threw myself on the couch, exhausted. Marcus insisted on staying nearby, worried about my condition, but I eventually convinced him that I was well enough to be left alone. The cold still burned my skin, and my muscles felt heavy, as if every cell in my body was exhausted from the experience. However, my mind was elsewhere. Even with the physical discomfort, I felt different, as if a part of me had been left in that ethereal state and now existed between two worlds. As my eyes began to close, I relived the experience in flashes, the initial darkness, the oppressive cold of the river, and then that moment of pure surrender. And soon after, the moment in which I was filled with an indescribable peace, a feeling of unity that was unparalleled in anything I had experienced until then. It was a peace that came from the realization that I was both individual and part of something vast and interconnected. In that state, everything I had considered important in life seemed to fade away. The fear, the ambition, the daily worries, all of these seemed insignificant compared to that feeling of total connection with the universe. I was part of something infinitely bigger than myself, and at the same time, that something bigger was inside me. Words fail to describe the complexity and simplicity of this feeling. It was not a vision or a conversation with an entity, but an understanding as clear as daylight. For an instant, I relived the feeling of being enveloped by a welcoming presence, a kind of invisible embrace that seemed to extend across the entire universe. It wasn't physical, but something that filled my soul with a gentle, constant warmth. There was a complete absence of fear or any form of negativity. I felt absolutely safe, as if nothing in the world could harm me. I remember thinking, or perhaps feeling, that all things, people, places, even the most painful moments, were like fragments of the same essence, linked by an invisible web of understanding and love. It was as if each person was a note in a cosmic symphony, each life a thread in the same fabric. I realized that there was no division, there were no borders, just a continuous unity. As I relived this feeling, tears welled up in my eyes. Not sadness, but a deep, almost inexplicable emotion. I understood, on a level that transcended words, that the true nature of the universe was love and peace. Death, I now felt, was not the end, but a passage to that state of oneness. And hell, the hell that so many doctrines preached as a place of eternal suffering, did not exist. What existed was a place of reunion, of acceptance, where all souls, in some way, would be together. I was immersed in this memory, in this understanding that seemed so vast, so true, when something brought me back to the present, the sound of the wind outside, the soft noise of my own breathing. Slowly, my mind returned to the physical world, but a part of me remained connected to this new perception, like a mark that would never leave me. I realized then that the experience wasn't over when I got out of the river. On the contrary, it would continue to echo through each of my days, constantly reminding me that there was something greater, something to live for and share. What I had experienced was not just any vision, it was a revelation about the essence of everything. Understanding that life did not end with death, and that we were all connected in an infinite dance of love and compassion, transformed me profoundly. Eventually, I realized that the only way to honor that experience was to live in accordance with this new understanding, with empathy, love, and respect for every being around me, because, at the end of the day, we are all part of this same consciousness. After that night, my life underwent a slow but irrevocable transformation. At first, what I had experienced seemed like a distant dream, a surreal episode that I could easily dismiss as delirium brought on by extreme cold and near death. However, the more I thought, the more I remembered the clarity with which I felt every detail of that experience, the absolute certainty of being faced with a profound truth. The revelation about death was the point that most impacted my worldview. I, who had always believed that death was the absolute end, felt, during those brief moments, that there was something beyond, something far greater and more expansive than anything I could imagine. It was not a sense of physical continuity or of a life in another body, but an understanding that our consciousness was just a small fraction of something vast and eternal. As I tried to describe this understanding to Marcus, I realized how difficult it was to express what I had felt. How can we explain that death, instead of being a door that closes, was actually a portal that opens to a reality where time and space are of no importance? Where do all our pains, fears, and anxieties disappear, replaced by a peace so absolute it's overwhelming? Man, I think it was just your brain. Like playing tricks on you, Marcus said, trying to convince me that what I felt was something purely biological, a chemical response of the body to trauma. Maybe, I replied, but even as I spoke, I knew that wasn't true. It was something I felt on a much deeper level. Death, as most of us know it, was wrong. The idea of an eternal hell, where condemned souls suffer for their mistakes, was an invention that did not hold up in light of what I had experienced. Instead, I felt that the true nature of the universe was welcoming, compassionate, like a mother waiting for all her children, and the revelation about hell was, for me, an indescribable relief. During the experience, there was no sign of eternal suffering, just an unshakable certainty that everyone, without exception, was loved and welcomed in a place of complete peace. This understanding was so strong that I wondered how so many of us lived in fear of eternal punishment. I saw that pain, regret, and learning are experiences that belong to life, to the physical world, and not to eternity. One afternoon, while talking to Eleanor, a spiritual therapist who helped me process the experience, she asked me a question that changed my perspective even further. "Fansel," she said, "do you think this realization that there is no eternal hell can change the way you live?" I thought about the question for a moment. "Yes," I replied, with a confidence I had never felt before. Because if there is no hell, then our only responsibility here is to love and learn. There is no need to live in fear of eternal judgment. We just need to live with compassion and respect, because we will all, at some point, find ourselves again. Eleanor smiled, as if she knew exactly what I was talking about. It's a profound truth, Ansel. Many who have had experiences like yours come to this same conclusion. True hell is what we create for ourselves, through our hurts and resentments, but when we overcome that, we become free. These words echoed in my mind for days, confirming what I had felt during the experience. Life should not be lived in fear of final judgment, but as an opportunity for learning, love, and connection. There was no punitive end waiting for us, just an acceptance and a return to unity. From that moment on, I decided that my life would be guided by this understanding. If we are all destined to return to a state of peace and love, then every interaction, every decision, and every relationship should be an expression of that truth. I began to focus on living in accordance with this understanding, trying to spread as much compassion and kindness as possible, because, in the end, all that matters is the love we leave along the way. After everything I experienced during the experience, returning to my body was brutal. It was like being pulled back into a smaller reality, confined and full of limitations. My spirit, which until then had experienced indescribable vastness and freedom, was forced back into a container that now seemed too small to contain all the understanding I carried. The transition was abrupt. One moment, I was immersed in the profound peace of that state of oneness, and the next instant, physical reality hit me like an icy wave. The cold returned with relentless force, cutting me like knives, and the pain was so intense that it took away any trace of calm I had. My lungs burned as they tried to adjust to the frigid air, and my throat felt raw from the river water I had swallowed. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was Marcus' face, desperate, with an expression of relief mixed with genuine concern. He was holding me by the shoulders, and his eyes were full of tears, something I never thought I'd see in a guy like him, always so confident and optimistic. "Ansel, oh my God, man, you're alive." He looked incredulous, almost as if he were seeing a ghost. I thought I lost you." My voice came out shaky and weak, more of a whisper than anything else. I'm here, Marcus, but at the same time, I didn't feel completely there. My mind still wandered between the memory of that peace and physical reality. The body was present, but my soul seemed to hover somewhere between the two worlds. Marcus helped me to my feet, and I began to cough up more river water as I felt the impact of the cold on every inch of my body. The discomfort was almost unbearable, but there was something even stranger going on. I looked around, and everything seemed different. The snow falling, the trees in the distance, even the wind blowing in my face. Everything had a subtle glow, a vitality that I had never noticed before. It was as if the physical world had gained a new dimension. "Let's get out of here before you really freeze," Marcus said, still holding my arm for support as we walked through the snow. With each step, my mind continued to oscillate between memories of the peaceful state and the reality around me. I tried to describe to Marcus what I had experienced, but words seemed impossible to form. "Marcus, I was in a different place. I don't know how to explain it, but it was vast. I felt part of everything." He looked at me with a confused expression. "Dude, you almost died. It must have just been your brain, you know? Like creating an experience to deal with trauma. You need to warm up now and rest." I knew he was worried and was trying to bring me back to reality, but I couldn't shake the feeling that what I experienced was more real than anything I'd ever experienced. There was a depth to that experience, a clarity that made me question everything I thought I knew about life. The feeling of unity, the certainty that death was not the end, all of that echoed in my mind, as if it were a truth that could never be forgotten. As we walked away from the river and back to the safety of the camp, a sudden sadness hit me. Part of me didn't want to leave that experience behind, didn't want to abandon the peace and understanding I had found. Returning to ordinary life felt like a kind of prison, a limitation after having known total freedom. Still, I knew something had changed forever. I was the same Ansel who fell into the river that night, but at the same time, I was someone completely new. And although returning to my body was uncomfortable and painful, I was determined to carry the essence of that experience with me, because now I had a certainty that no one could take away from me. Death was not the end, and life was much more than what the eyes could see. In the days following the accident, a new realization began to take root within me. Silent, but powerful, I tried to get back to the routine, to the comfort of the simple life I've always led, but something inside me wouldn't allow it. The near-death experience had marked my soul in an irreversible way. Every look I gave the world was different. Things that once seemed banal, a simple leaf falling, the sound of wind passing through the trees, a child's laughter, now brought me a kind of reverence that I couldn't explain. A remarkable change happened in my relationships with people. It wasn't just an increase in empathy, it was something deeper, almost visceral. I felt the emotions of the people around me with an intensity that, at times, was uncomfortable. If someone was sad or distressed, it was as if I could see beyond their words and gestures, as if a part of me could connect directly with their feelings. It was an intense sensitivity, which made me almost read people's hearts. Marcus was the first to notice this change. One night, as we sat on the porch of my house, he watched me in silence for a few minutes before speaking. "You look different, Ansel. It seems lighter, but at the same time, it seems to carry something that I can't understand." He looked at the floor, choosing his words carefully. "What you experienced that night, it seems to have changed you, man." I couldn't help but smile. "It's changed, Marcus. The truth is that since that night, nothing has made sense in the same way. The way I saw the world, people, even death, all of that changed. I know it sounds strange, but I feel like now I can see life with different eyes." He nodded, although he still looked a little confused. "But what does that look like exactly? I mean, what do you feel?" I thought for a moment, trying to put into words what was almost indescribable. "It's like we are all connected, in ways I never imagined. As if each person, each living being, was an extension of me. I feel like we are all part of one thing, something bigger than ourselves." And that made me realize that the fear, the anger, the hurt we carry, all of this is so small compared to the truth. Over time, my life transformed into something I never would have imagined before. This intense sensitivity has made me a natural advisor to those around me. People who previously didn't interact with me much now came looking for advice or simply to talk. Often, without knowing how, I said the exact words they needed to hear. It was as if the near-death experience had opened a door within me, a source of wisdom I didn't know I possessed. These conversations, these moments of connection with people, brought me a satisfaction I had never experienced. The idea of success, of seeking personal achievements, has lost its meaning. All that mattered now was living in harmony with this new vision, spreading what I learned in the purest way possible, through love, compassion, and listening. Months passed, and I realized that I no longer feared death. In fact, it was no longer the end that interested me, but rather the process of living fully. That experience taught me that our existence is a gift, an opportunity for connection, understanding, and love. Every human being carries within them the same purpose, and life is the space where that purpose can flourish. Sometimes I felt a weight, a responsibility that didn't exist before, but it was a light weight, a burden I gratefully accepted. I had been touched by a truth that many people went their entire lives without encountering, and now I felt the need to share that truth in the most authentic way possible. This new awareness did not come without challenges. There were moments when I felt the anguish of knowing that many people were still trapped in their pain, blind to the beauty of life. However, the impact of that night on the river gave me the strength to move forward, because deep down, I knew that my mission now was this: to live as an example of what I had learned and, perhaps, help others find their own path to peace and understanding. A few months after the accident, I met Eleanor Kane, a spiritual therapist with a deep gaze and a calming presence that seemed to embrace the environment around her. The way I got there seemed, in retrospect, guided by something bigger. I had heard about Eleanor from a friend who was also looking for answers about spirituality. At the time, I resisted the idea of opening up to a therapist, especially about such an intimate and inexplicable experience. But something in me, perhaps a desire to better understand what I had experienced, pushed me to look for her. When I first walked into Eleanor's office, I was greeted by an aura of serenity. The room was decorated in a simple but cozy way, with plants scattered around the corners and a subtle scent of lavender that filled the air. She greeted me with a warm smile and gestured for me to sit down. "Ansel, I'm glad you came," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I heard you had an experience that changed you. Can you tell me a little about it?" I started hesitantly, struggling to find the right words. Talking about the experience was like trying to describe a new color to someone who had never seen it. "It's hard to explain, Eleanor. I felt a unity, a peace that I've never experienced before. It wasn't just a place, it was like the universe itself, like I was in touch with everything." She nodded, listening to each word carefully, and never once showed disbelief or skepticism. This gave me the confidence to continue. I told her about falling into the river, the darkness, the fight for survival, and finally the state of peace and understanding I had experienced. As I described the feeling of unity and the absence of any hell or punishment, I realized that my words sounded less strange than I imagined. "Eleanor, I think experience has shown me that death is not what we thought. There is no eternal punishment, only love and peace." Eleanor gave a compassionate smile. "Many people who have experiences like yours come to similar conclusions. The fear of hell is something that limits us, that prevents us from living fully, but you have found something greater, Ansel, a truth that few understand." As we continued the sessions, Eleanor helped me explore the depths of that experience. With her help, I began to realize that what I had experienced was not just an isolated event, but the beginning of a journey of transformation. She encouraged me to embrace this new worldview and allow the experience to influence my life in positive ways. "Ansel, you have been gifted with a rare vision. Many spend their entire lives seeking this peace. and you found it in a moment of vulnerability. Now the question is, how do you want to live from this? The question echoed in my mind for days. How did I want to live with the knowledge that the universe was a safe and welcoming place, where every being was part of the same consciousness? The answer slowly began to take shape. I wanted to be someone who helped others find peace, someone who could spread the love and understanding I felt in that state of oneness. Eleanor taught me to value experience without clinging to it, to use it as a source of strength and empathy. She showed me that true spirituality is not just about seeking answers, but also about living with purpose and compassion, understanding the interconnectedness between all things. With her, I learned to look at the people around me with more kindness, realizing that everyone carries their own pains and searches. These sessions with Eleanor not only helped me process what I experienced, but they also taught me how to cultivate peace and love in my daily life. I came to realize that my experience was, in fact, an invitation to live a life of purpose, to share this vision of unity and acceptance with those who were looking for answers. Eleanor helped me see that I didn't need to convince anyone of what I experienced. It was enough to live according to this new understanding. With each conversation, my determination to live more compassionately and consciously grew. I felt like my journey with Eleanor was part of something much bigger, and that my near-death experience was just the beginning of a new way of living. Along my journey, the near-death experience went from being just a distant memory to a guide, a reference point that shaped every choice, every thought, and every interaction. Over time, the impact of that night became as natural in my life as the air I breathed. I learned to not just accept the experience, but to live by what it taught me. The peace and sense of unity I felt while floating between life and death showed me that there is no place for fear. I had experienced a state of love so pure and vast that it now seemed clear to me that hell, as a concept of eternal suffering, did not exist. It was a human creation, fueled by our own fears and lack of understanding. The true essence of life, and also of death, was love, acceptance, and the certainty that all of us, at some point, would return to this peace. By sharing my story with others, I realized the impact it could make. People approached me looking for answers, not because I was a guru or had any special power, but because I spoke with honesty and vulnerability. I shared what I had learned, that each life matters, that each person we encounter is an extension of ourselves, and that there is nothing more important than living with empathy and respect. Eleanor's words continued to echo in my mind. The real hell is what we create for ourselves, through our hurts and resentments. But when we overcome that, we free ourselves. Over time, this understanding transformed me. I began to see every challenge and every pain as an opportunity for growth, an invitation to practice compassion and connect with others on a deeper level. This new vision brought a serenity I had never felt before. I no longer worried about impressing others, accumulating material possessions, or pursuing superficial achievements. The only thing that mattered was the quality of the connections I made and the love I was able to spread. I began dedicating my time to helping those around me, whether by listening, advising, or simply offering my presence. I discovered that there was immense depth and meaning in small acts of kindness. As the years passed, I felt a growing gratitude for the experience that transformed me. In moments of silence, I could still connect with that peace, that sense of unity that I experienced during my near-death. It was like an inner portal that I could access whenever I needed guidance or comfort. My message to those who ask about what I have learned is always the same. Death is not the end. It is a transition to a state of love and unity that transcends all human understanding. There is nothing to fear. Live each day with compassion, seek to understand others, and remember that, in the end, we are all part of the same essence. Those who listened to me were generally silent, absorbing the words. Some smiled, others cried, and many just nodded, as if they were feeling the truth of it in their own hearts. This acceptance was what kept me going, knowing that somehow my experience was touching other lives and helping people find some peace in their own journeys. Now, as I look back, I realized that my near-death experience was not an isolated event, but the beginning of a mission, a calling to live authentically and lovingly. My purpose became clear: to share this message of unity and understanding with anyone who would listen. Because, at the end of the day, we are not alone. We are all fragments of the same consciousness, parts of a universal symphony that seeks only one thing: peace and love. Concluding this report is, in a way, a way of honoring everything I have experienced. I know words will never be enough to describe what I experienced that night on the frozen river, but I hope that by sharing my story, I can help others see life more broadly, to embrace the possibility that there is something beyond our eyes can see, and, above all, to live with more love, because, in the end, love is everything we take and what we leave. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.